Do you think of yourself as a positive person or not? Either way, it can be a practice that we actually undertake. And that's what we're going to be discussing on today's video. I'm Doug Smith of the Online Dharma Institute. That's onlinedharma.org, where you can find courses about early Buddhism and early Dharma. If you're new to this channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to this channel and click the bell down below if you want to receive notifications when I come out with new videos. So what I like to do on this channel is to have a positive outlook, to try to, if you like, model positivity, to try to give you encouragement in your practice and in your life to do the kinds of good things that I'm sure you're all capable of. But we have to understand also that being positive, being optimistic in a certain sense, being confident in a certain sense, is a practice. It's something that we can actually undertake. And I'll tell you a secret, which is that myself, without practice, certainly before practice, I tended to be, and indeed at many times in my life still am, somewhat negative. And it's taken me really a long time of practice and inner searching and looking to realize that kind of outlook was not helpful. And indeed, I suspect that I'm not alone in this feeling at times of getting down on myself or getting down on other people. There's a kind of a creeping cynicism, I think, that is in our culture today around, you'll certainly see it on the internet, Lord knows, everywhere, a kind of a feeling that things are bad, that people are doing bad things. And we don't indeed want to deny that, and I'll get to some of that in a bit, but it's important to put it into perspective, and at least on our own side, to have something that we're practicing, that we're trying to get ourselves out of the worst of it ourselves. In other words, we're trying not to add to the problem, let me put it that way. There's an early sutta that where the Buddha discusses this kind of issue, where he's looking back at the time before he was awakened. So when he was a young person, a young man perhaps, and he says that he thought about how his mind was working. In other words, while he was still a youth, he was curious about the workings of his own mind and the way he thought about the world. And he says at the time, he divided his thoughts up into two kinds. And he says the first kind were thoughts that he found were greedy or malign, malevolent. These kinds of cruel thoughts that he had, the kinds of perhaps cynical thoughts that we have ourselves about the world, or even self-hating thoughts. In the second group, he found that he had thoughts that were not that type, that were more generous, that were more kind, that were not malevolent, that were harmless towards people, that were compassionate. And when he reflected on these two kinds of thoughts, the bodhisattva, that is to say the Gautama, before he became awakened, he reflected on the fact that there was a difference. There was a very significant difference between these two kinds of thoughts. And when he reflected on what we might term now the unskillful thought, the first kind of thought, he says, this kind of thought leads to hurting myself, to hurting others, and to hurting both. It blocks wisdom. It's on the side of anguish, and it doesn't lead to extinguishment. So these kinds of thoughts, the first kind, are harmful. They hurt ourselves. They hurt other people, and both. They're the kinds of thoughts that lead us towards wanting to harm others. I mean, some of these are thoughts about harm. Indeed, and we do, if we lapse from our practice, or if we don't have much of a practice, we can indeed, and even with a practice, frankly, let's be honest, we can have thoughts of cruelty, of wanting to harm others. And these can then find their way out towards our own kinds of actions. And he says that these are thoughts that also involve us in just sort of getting down on ourselves. They're negative thoughts. They're not the kinds of things that actually push us forward into a better way of living. They tend to block, he says, block wisdom. They block wisdom in many different ways. One of those ways, of course, is to make us cynical, as I say, about the world. And by being cynical, we become less open to actually learning from anything because we tend to think everything's bad. We tend to look at everything as a negative. We tend to pull apart everything that comes in front of us and so become unwilling or unable to actually learn the positive things in the world that can actually make us wiser and better actors. Now, the Buddha also notice in the same sutta this is actually a very famous sentence or phrase from this sutta, which is really resounded down the years and can be, in a certain sense, a hallmark of all of Buddhist practice. And what the Buddha says is that he noticed whatever one frequently thinks about and considers becomes one's heart's inclination. That is to say, that our character, who we are from moment to moment, depends upon habits, depends upon our past habits. And indeed, this is a kind of an informal way of thinking about karma as well, the Buddhist or Indian general notion of karma. That is to say, that what we do and what we have done in the past makes us who we are now, and what we do now will make us who we are in the future. And that is partly due to habit. So if we reinforce, let's say, our negative thoughts, the first group, our thoughts of cruelty, of malevolence towards others, of greediness, if we reinforce those thoughts by indulging in them, then they're going to tend to recur more in the future. They're going to become part of our daily habit. On the other hand, if we practice more skillful kinds of thinking, and this is a practice. In other words, if we make the effort to try not to think those kinds of thoughts and think better thoughts, put ourselves into those kinds of situations even, then we can have different habits. We can foster different habits that will make our mind different in the future. And this is a long process, but what's perhaps most important to it is the practice of mindfulness, which I've discussed many times on these videos. Now, I'll put a link to a playlist about the foundations of mindfulness practice. But in a nutshell, the idea is that we want to spend time regularly, hopefully every day if you have that opportunity, to become quiet, focus on the breath for a while to relax and quiet the mind, and then pay attention to what is arising. And this can give you a good insight into what your past habits have inculcated into your mind, what your past habits have brought to your mind now. And I submit that for many of us, and certainly I don't exclude myself from this number at all, for many of us what will arise will be negative thoughts, will be thoughts of ill will, of anger, of greed at times, thoughts of wanting to harm people or harm organizations, whatever it might be. And that awareness can then give us, I would say, some of the spur towards our action now. In other words, we can become aware of the depth of these kinds of problematic thoughts by sitting with them and simply becoming aware of them. And that can give us, a spur towards a further practice. Now, when discussing practicing this kind of positivity or confidence, there isn't really a word for positivity that I know of in the early texts. It's not really discussed in those terms. However, there is a term that I think models that, which is the term, it's a Pali term, saddha, which is variously translated as confidence, as conviction, or as faith. And this is we might call the happy turn of mind that comes up in us when we contemplate, let's say, elements of the Dharma, elements of wise teachings, elements of wiser kinds of ways of living. And I think this kind of confidence or conviction, if you like, can be a great benefit to us in difficult times. That is to say, to consider the freedom involved with elements of renunciation. In other words, of renouncing certain parts of our lives that aren't useful to us anymore, or of kindness and compassion towards others. These kinds of positive outlooks of being helpful, even in a small way to somebody, being nice to somebody, can free us if we're really down about something. Now, there's another sense in the West of faith, another sense of that word, if we're going to translate this term that way, where we have a kind of a blind faith. And and that's problematic because it can get us into many difficulties if we simply have blind faith in things. And in the same way, this notion of positivity or positive thinking often gets a bad rap, and I think for good reason, because it can seem to many people, and indeed it can be, that what that really ends up meaning for many of us is that we put on rosy-eyed glasses, that we look at the world through rosy eyes, we see no evil, we hear no evil, we turn our eyes away from whatever is problematic and bad or unjust in the world, and sort of cocoon ourselves in a kind of ignorant fog. And that, of course, is not the proper practice. That's not what we want to be doing here. Or in other words, we don't want to be doing what's called spiritual bypassing. Now, I did an earlier video on the concept of spiritual bypassing, which I'll put in a link down below in the show notes. But basically, the idea is that spiritual bypassing is this kind of brittle positivity, let's say. This positivity that depends upon our pretending that we're much more advanced than we really are. Pretending that there's nothing wrong with us because we're so far advanced. And if we get ourselves into that kind of positivity, again, that's very brittle because we're not going to really be able to stand up to the true problems in life. We're simply bypassing them. And we don't want to do that. So the positivity that I'm suggesting here, and that I try to foster on the channel and in my own practice anyhow, is a positivity that is based again on this kind of confidence in the Dharma, but that tries as much as I can do, and I would suggest the same for you, tries not to cling to or identify too much with outcomes. That is to say that just as we can put on blinders and pretend that bad things don't exist, we can also get ourselves too confident in an outcome that is, in the final analysis, outside of our ability to control. Just as really all of life is, in a sense, outside of our ability to control completely by any stretch of the imagination. And so, while we may be confident, if our confidence is based upon our success, let's say in a job, that we're going to get the job that we want, or that we're going to get the contract that we want, or that we're going to get the political outcome that we want, if our confidence is based upon worldly success in some way, then it's based upon an insecure foundation. And that's also not where we want to be. And it's not where we want to be because in that direction lies danger, frankly. Because in that way lies disillusionment. If our confidence, our positivity is based upon our being successful in the world in some respect, we're liable to be disillusioned over and over and over again in our lives unless we happen to be very lucky. And if and when we do become disillusioned, our positivity is going to evaporate. And we're going to end up back in the cynicism and the negativity that we're trying to get out of. So the positivity that I'm trying to suggest here for you in your practice is one that's really based more on the here and now, more on, let's say, a confidence in the right, a confidence in what you're doing, that what you're doing is correct, is wise, in a confidence, let's say, in wise teachings that you have heard either, let's say, in early Buddhism or Stoicism or some related kind of philosophy or religion or thought process that leads you in the right direction. Now, there are a number of supporting practices that I'm going to suggest here that will be helpful, I think, to you if you're trying to do this kind of practice. The first is to search out people in your own life who model this kind of positivity. And I'm sure, well, I'm not absolutely sure, but I hope and expect that many of you will have people in your life that are positive in this respect, that do model this kind of positive thinking. Again, that's not a positive thinking that's not blinding itself to the problems in the world, but is simply seeing a sort of an inner confidence with the route that they're taking. And if and when you find such people in your life, those are the people I think that you want to frequent, their company. And you, on the other hand, want to consider how much time you want to spend with people who model the opposite. That is also, I think, many of us in our lives have, at least at times, had people who are the opposite, who are negative, who model cynicism, who model a kind of curdled kind of anger towards the world. And the question again is how much time we want to spend with those, because again, this is a practice. And if we spend time with people who are modeling states of mind that we want to avoid ourselves, we're liable to get pulled into their way of thinking, unless, of course, we feel that we can change them. However, I would caution that it's very difficult to change other people. And indeed, I think my own feeling over a lifetime of experience is, not a huge lifetime, but in any way a lifetime of experience, is that really people don't change very easily. They have to want to change. And so I think we have to be aware of that and be concerned about thinking that we can change people who are negative simply by wanting them to change. That often doesn't work. Another supporting practice is meditation, as I've suggested. Doing regular meditation, keeping track, keeping an eye, keeping a kind of a tally of ourselves on a daily basis of where we are. How are we modeling positivity in our thought process? And this is not to get down on ourselves, because one of the great things about meditation is to do it without fear or favor. In other words, when we open our eyes to a mindfulness kind of practice, we're not doing it in order to say, think this and don't think that. That's after. After we've done the meditation, then we can say, okay, this is the way we really should be practicing. But during the meditation, we should open our mind to everything that's coming up. And if what's coming up is negativity, is ideas of cruelty, or however bad it is, then that's just the way it is. And that's part of living the life that we have, is to see what's coming up. And then when we come out of the meditation, we can make a resolution perhaps to take account of what we've just seen in meditation and perhaps think of ways to change it. Okay, so meditation is one practice. Another practice that I've found personally extremely useful is regular exercise. And this may sound strange, channel on Buddhist Dharma, talking about exercise, but exercise for me has been, I think, extremely beneficial in giving a kind of an innate kind of confidence and positivity that doesn't come easily from any other route. Simply by doing exercise, we give ourselves confidence because we can do the exercise. And we're oftentimes, if we push ourselves a bit, we're able to do a little more than we did before, or do something a little bit better, or anyhow do the same thing and feel good afterwards, feel alive. And that's a help. And of course, it also is very healthy for us, and keeping our health is very important towards keeping our positivity as well. Another great supporting practice is a gratitude practice. That is, to try to make some time every day to focus on what you're grateful in your life. And this can be parts of your life that are just not due to any particular person's influence, but just good things that you've seen that day or experienced that day. And also, I think it's important in that kind of gratitude practice to make some portion of it be gratitude towards others. What have others done, even incidentally, to make your life better? And I don't necessarily mean that somebody has to say, focus on you in particular and try to make your life better. That may happen. If so, that's great. But the fact is, so much around us, so much that we depend upon, is due to the beneficial influence of other people. And we often forget this. And if we get too negative and cynical, we can really overlook it. So everything around you is produced by other people. Your electricity, your water. I've said these things a number of times in my channel, but I don't think that they can be overstated. Everything around you, virtually, is due to the influence of other people doing beneficial things that help you. And taking some time to be aware of those benefits and foster a sense of gratitude for them can be of an immense benefit. And I think can also help your interactions with people, let's say in the workplace, or if you're seeing somebody behind a counter who is selling you something, or maybe fixing something that's broken in your apartment or your house or your car or whatever. Just to model gratitude towards those people can be a route towards positivity. Now, the Buddha also suggests a couple of thought processes that we can go through that can help us model a similar kind of positive thinking. Now, these thought processes, these kinds of meditations, if you like, are going to be most useful to traditional practitioners because they model the importance, the specialness of having a human birth. So in Buddhism, in early Buddhist thought, most births, the vast majority, are non-human. And of course, we get reborn as many, many different things. That's the traditional viewpoint. And as a result, since human birth is so fleeting and such a tiny percentage, and yet it is from the human birth that we can attain awakening, unlike other births, in other births it really becomes almost impossible, the Buddha says that we should focus on the incredible luck we have. He says one way of thinking of it is he compares the amount of dust on his fingernail, that he scoops up a small amount of dust on the top of his fingernail and says that the dust on his fingernail compared to the entire world, the earth of the entire world, is the comparison between the chance of getting a human birth and the chance of getting some other kind of birth. And in another place, he has a rather famous simile where he compares being born as a human to the chance of a blind turtle in the vast oceans coming up for air, who comes up for air once every century, the chance of that turtle putting its head through a small floating ring that's on the top of the oceans. He says, this is so unlikely in the vast scheme of things that it's not going to happen in, of course, many, many, many millions, billions of years. In the same way, getting a human birth is very unusual. And so, as a result, we should celebrate it and make use of it, is the point, is that we should make effort. Now, another supporting practice, or a group of supporting practices, deals with counteracting the alternative, that is, negativity. Because oftentimes we are overwhelmed with negativity in our own lives, and oftentimes also that's due to other people trying to get us down. How do we deal with that kind of negativity that we see around us in the world, on the internet? How do we deal with other people getting us down, or even ourselves getting us down? And I did an earlier video on dealing with negativity, which I'll put a link to up on the screen here. I suggest taking a look at it. Thanks so much. If you've gotten some useful stuff out of this, check out my Patreon page, and we'll catch you on the next one of these videos. All of you, meanwhile, be well.